to my presentation about Story First Drupal. It's a term that I found recently when following all these improvement discussions around Drupal core and like it's for me and hopefully for you discovery trail to like figure out how to develop a mindset of what story first in Drupal would mean. And it's a big transition. It's not like, hey, content is the most important thing. We cannot just switch the UI and prepare everything and then like we're done. It's a development of a process. We need to learn about it. And I'm the founder of MD Systems, and for instance, I'm maintaining paragraphs, this is like the summary of a process when we've been maintaining paragraphs and iterated on it and tried to figure out how can we improve it. Did product development on the other side and learned a lot about content creators and how they would want to use Drupal for productivity. That's annoying. So the outline first, why are we doing this? And then what Drupal is not, looking at the story life cycle and what type of content we're talking about, and then look at what's the actual situation as an assessment and ideas how to improve it. Yes, do we agree? Is content creation our main use case? Because let's look at this thingy. Like we, as a developer, we have like site building development in our mind, and we even have obsolete patterns in mind from, say, Drupal 6, Drupal 7 times, maybe if you have been part of before, and it's really hard to get rid of these mindsets. And recently, looking at, for instance, the transition, how WordPress moved over to like front-end editing, Gutenberg, party, everything is perfect. This is a big, I don't know how to say it in nice English, but this is was a big problem for them. They forgot about accessibility. I know they suddenly then, after a lot of discussions and escalations, they finally picked up the subject and said, yes, okay, we're going to look into it. You will find exciting posts about this subject with explicit words. And it's really about bad community management as well. So we don't want to repeat this within Drupal. We cannot just say front-end editing, perfect. Yeah, one conclusion there. For instance, WordPress is they also have WooCommerce in it, where you manage more complex type of content or pieces. And their simple statement is like, well, you know, complex products are still complex. You cannot manage products like this in a front end. So it's about finding a healthy balance between what is structured content, what is structured information, where do we need a structured UI, and what can we manage within a front end actually. And front end only will not solve this problem. And again, I learned, like we had so many ideas, and many of these were really bad then in the end for user experience, and I learned that it's not fulfilling, it's even worsening the user interface situation for actual content creators. And we did it maybe like 30 or 50 times, and it didn't help to iterate with testing or maybe create virtual screens and discuss about it. It needed us to write content on ourselves. We use the tool to create content and figure out how it feels if you continue to use it. And that's like my most important message here is like we really need to use these tools until like maybe like the reinvention of our modernization UI, until this is usable and really provides great improvements for the actual end users. And from that point of view, I definitely think we need to rescope the goals for core. If you're talking about these long-term goals, like it's Drupal 10 or maybe later, we really need to think about what, in addition to the current situation, and just taking Drupal and modernizing it a bit, but in addition needs to be part of Drupal core to support this process better, because we cannot with paragraphs, we reach the limit to work around limitations and problems within core, and we cannot improve it anymore. I will show you this later a bit, where we reach these limits, and we need better support from core. Yes, about these mindsets, just to remind you, when we introduced a field like CCK in Drupal 6, like in Drupal 7 it was really entities and fields, but still it took until Drupal 8 when these fieldable things, for instance, were really usable on other types of content entities. For instance, if you look at today, even like we invented paragraphs in Drupal 7, if you look at today at Drupal 8 taxonomies, sometimes you want to put an intro text to a taxonomy or something like that, and like to have this as an interesting landing page. But there is no revision management, as in a revision tab or something that is supporting you to do this. We are still using nodes to create these type of pages, although we have like since 2 major versions, an fieldable entity system that would have supported revision. So we're not there that these tools are really broadly available everywhere. And in Drupal 7, still there were the capabilities to create with paragraphs exciting landing pages. But I've seen 20 sites where people were creating like monstrous pages of nodes and other nodes that are combined with the building tools from the mindset of maybe Drupal 6 or so. They didn't catch up on the new tools that were available, so it will need a lot of time until the tools, even if they theoretically will be ready, will be successfully introduced by the agencies or by people and adopted to the workflow, to the developers, and ship it to the end users to provide real value to them. And on the other side, I had this nice discussion. Florian, it's a nice challenge. Like, is Drupal actually the right tool to this thing? But if Drupal wouldn't be the right thing to create this type of content, I mean, would we want to drop it and just say there's no use case at all for Drupal if we, for instance, decouple and remove presentation like that? In my opinion, it's like if content creation is not the primary use case, then we wouldn't need Drupal at all anymore. Yes, let's see. And I think also there's a lot Drupal is handling and providing value by handling this kind of complexity from the entity system, with bundles, fields. These are stacked up dimensions of complexity, view modes, so you have multiple perspectives on the same entity, for support form modes for different contexts of forms, and then revision, multilingualism, workflows in addition on top of that. And the last one is you can use to a certain degree also our different say backend, frontend, or APIs to feed from Drupal multiple channels. You don't have a UI yet, but it's used. Drupal is used with maybe term assignment or stuff like this to feed multiple publishing channels that are not originated in Drupal. On the right hand still, don't forget, it's not a big problem today because everything is HTML centric, but if you want to go into non-HTML channels, there are no tools available within Drupal to, say, go into a PDF domain. You might use a headless browser or so to create a PDF, but the stack of a view mode, you cannot create a view mode for a PDF or so. They're like bad. We don't have abstraction to that level. It's really HTML centric how we built the whole form system, rendering system, and all this. And sorry for the last point here. In my mindset, we still see that the REST API and the whole API abstraction of Drupal is in its early stage. We have GraphQL and all these things, but you see that it's still a short-term feature. Like we don't have it too long, and we need to make a lot of experience to be API first. And for instance, you see this with the recent highly critical security issue that there are, like, we figure out that once everyone is starting to use it, deep inside core, we have crazy limitations that are suddenly exposed, and no one was ever thinking about it because we are not used to this domain and we're not experts in it. And the system in its core needs to figure out how to deal with this transition. So there's still a lot of work to be the API first perfect Drupal system, and people are have problems with slowness or stuff like this. And on the left side is the technical problems that we faced. Basically, I want a content page to be content as one piece, and we don't have like this the composite relationship, a part element in Drupal. We cannot express this as being part of the actual host node. So there is entity reference, which is referencing loose entities, but we cannot express that an entity is part of the other thing. And that's basically the biggest limitation, which also applies, like, it's even getting worse when you look into how the forms are built with the form, it's content entity forms, it goes through the form builder, and then it goes through widgets, and then widgets are nested based on field definitions, and there, due to this nesting and recursion, we're hitting the limits from the form and widget system that it's not even possible to work around properly and reconstruct perfectly this entity composite relationship. It's kind of where things are starting to fall apart, where we are doing crazy complex workarounds that are slowing down the form UI, and that are also leading to too many storage operations. And for instance, also the validation, due to the complexity of this stack, is really slow. It was already slow before. And just saying, like, in case we want to develop an idea, these days everyone, if you think of content, you might use Google Docs, and you're just simply used to live collaboration, and we don't have tools yet for these things. And sure, at the end, everyone is, since 2 or 3 years, like, everyone is saying, yeah, but front-end editing should be the highest priority of paragraphs, and we're still, I'm at that point where I say, okay, we try to optimize backend and all these things, and it's the right milestone for me also to figure out what specifically are we doing in the front end, and why are we focusing on that, and where do we, like, where do we find the right balance? So I want to address the front end editing subject as well. Yes, and as said before, yes, we will. When you iterate on this, you figure out that not only, well, you will identify new requirements, totally new requirements, just because you start to work different, and you will figure out after 2-3 steps that basically the whole value system, why you decided for this and that in the architecture, in the design, maybe in site building, why basically these reasoning for it completely changes. We can go quickly through this part. Just showing you, reminding you once, after seeing all the exciting front end, or sorry, the JavaScript admin UI things, this is the current state. And if you think like, okay, I want to do content work, it's the admin, it's a state for a super administrator. But there is one single item which is content on the left side, that is the entry point to do content management, and on the right side it's an edit button. And within the content is kind of distracted by the tabs. So if you want to understand as an editor how the content is perceived, this is already a big problem sometimes, because it's adding visual noise, and you're kind of seeing the content totally different compared to the experience of a user without this element inside. And then still, if I click, and that's the most obvious, if I click this edit thing, I cannot edit the content. It starts to show me these contextual links in case the module is enabled. And that's like, okay, and now I can edit again there, or it's really, there's some user confusion that starts here. Yeah, looking, that's like the next step, because not everything that we're seeing here is actually content. Well, the amount of content is very limited that we can actually edit. Most of these things are blocks. Okay, agree, you wouldn't see these links if you wouldn't have the block administration permission. But keep in mind, these layout blocks are heavily used these days still to establish layout on landing pages, overviews and things like these. And it requires us to provide to the customer administer blocks permissions. And I just want to show you what does it mean from the backend perspective. Again, I'm looking at my blocks, maybe they're used, some sites have 100 blocks or so. You end up with a huge list, and it's impossible on this view to know, on this perspective here, to know which block is maybe shown on a specific page. It's completely inappropriate. And for blocks that are always visible, that's not a big issue because you can see them here, but blocks might have conditional visibility and suddenly you cannot find them. So the user experience is totally unacceptable. So blocks are not a solution. The toolbar does not really help us for the content-centric situation. We have too many administer permissions that we need to provide to our users that are not separated. And the layout builder, like on the right side here, you see like blocks, layout builder view, views headers, like I want to place a list somewhere and there's an intro text. These are site building tools. These simply don't fit for content creators. And we have so few tools that are actually content-centric. And by the way, still, there is also sometimes text appearing on the website that customers want to change that are actually originated in code. And to go one step further, like there are even more nicer tools that try to support the editor, as in quick edit and maybe the settings tray. And after enabling this module, each of these contextual links has 4 different ways to edit each item. And even like I never remember correctly which one is which one. So like when I'm actually going into the blog settings, or maybe when it's really challenging. So I never used it actually. And on the left side, if you click the edit thing, that suddenly the edit is on the left side when you enable these modules, and then it switches to the perspective below. And I'm sorry, but for instance, there's a pen sign on the right side, and I'm always confused that sometimes this thing is like clickable or sometimes not. So the sidebar, in my opinion, the whole header domain is also pretty strange in the experience. So I do not consider this really usable in the current state. And by the way, that's not a content example here. That's an example of a block, because the block is the only thing that is supporting these 2 perspectives of a little bit of quick edit on the left side and plus a little bit of structural information on the right side. But it was an important case to show maybe these 2 perspectives. And finally, what content means for our customers, like in multiple projects, sometimes customers see a website simply and say, I want to edit content. But we're shipping at least 5 different origins of that type of content, from either the node itself, it could be a block, it could be a view header, it could be coded text, or even it could be a result of translation. And each of these elements are different to edit. And it's totally unacceptable. And yeah, before I want to look into maybe proposals, I want to bring up something that I almost never have seen in the Drupal domain, because when we look at the phases of the story creation, and it took my time to figure out, like, to expand the list. It's actually 9 completely different steps within content creation that express individual requirements. So if you want to optimize content creation for the phase of planning, you have a completely different mindset and expectation of the tooling you need and of how you want to optimize the user interface. I want to iterate through these. Yes, so planning is administrative. There are nice proposals for like calendars, deadlines. I need this story by that person for maybe this channel, this use, apply a workflow for a single element and define like what are my expectations for the story. And usually it's also pulling in assets like, hey, maybe you want to use this and that piece of like images. And that's something we usually do not support at all currently. And then there's a, before we talk about structured content, there's a phase that most people don't do in Drupal at all. As they just simply take white paper or maybe their Word and start to iterate on ideas and outline a bit what they want to express. And it's definitely not a structured process. And we cannot, if you want to support that phase, we cannot apply any kind of validation. And every added field that asks for metadata is adding a barrier to quickly iterating and expressing ideas. And yes, then once I have a clear idea of what I want to write and like kind of develop this in an unstructured way, it's the phase where you actually would want to transform this into the expected structure. And that's why we started in our solution paragraphs to figure out how can we support transformation. And it's the moment when we start to basically make fields for metadata visible, and when we start to apply validation to reach the expected result of the form of the content. That's, yeah, like that's slowly the situation that Drupal starts to support. One step afterwards, it's more the review situation, where typically it's totally not about editing, it's more viewing, how does it appear, and it's more like you would want to comment, like these days might be, yeah, you do on Google Docs or so. You want to comment, maybe you want to quickly fix it, or you want to assign it back and update the briefing and the expectations. Yeah, usually these tools are not available. And then when we are short before actually publishing the story, or in the like for us currently it's one button, publish, one checkbox. I know there are modules as well like responsive previews. But if you completely separate this, might be a completely separate person, you would want to have a nice overview where you basically see all the different ways, like maybe view modes, the story as a teaser, the story, in different sizes of screens, to prove that the quality are met within the channel where you publish it, and multiple channels, like in case you choose different channels have different appearances here. Sometimes there are websites that are, say, switching a theme for one channel. So that would be the moment where you want to see the content in both of these themes on one single page to prove. And some channels in more complex cases, at this point, like they also have certain constraints, like, sorry, you cannot publish this image in this channel because we need a hero element or something like that. In addition to maybe the more basic validation that we're doing before. And very important after publishing is a phase where we need to start collect data about how the story is succeeding or not. And there are, for instance, media companies, and there are even services. They're measuring scroll depth of users to figure out whether users are reading the story to the end, or how are the user behaving on the website. Because only if we have this phase, for sure we can learn how to improve the next briefings for the next story, but we also have the situation that we want to say this story needs to be improved. And some media companies, they really iterate over the same story multiple times per day, change the headlines based on A/B testing, improve the wording, add elements, like enrich the elements, as in promoting a quote to something that looks different, to remove this endless text wall, maybe the original story version that was just a long text. And also keep in mind that this kind of improvement cycle, even technically, it's supported by our workflows, but we need to track changes from the previous publishing. And for instance, with translations or for review, we should support the reviewer, as in, look, only these bits have changed, or we should support the translator, not as in, take the whole story and check whether the translation is still fine. Or, sometimes changes are not translated, the translations are not updated, and sometimes still, even if they try by quickly reading through the story, they're not seeing that a specific word that was semantically important has changed, and that needs to be updated. So we need to have better tools to see what changed between the last publishing step. And yes, before we go forward, I think it's really important that if Drupal wants to be content creation centric, that our requirements to the UI that we're creating fulfills these different needs, and that we are dealing with them as different requirements and different perspectives, and that we need to build different solutions or different user interfaces to fulfill that. Very quickly, I just want to remind or show you the grayed out part in the header and in the footer. It's the only thing that is not content in these websites. So to look at, that's like the front page, and like we have lots of different not only text elements that we want to manage as content, not with blocks or whatever configuration or things that we have. And then here a rich article, and I still consider here the placement of the conversion element and even the references, like the other teasers that are placed here as content. It's a content decision that I want to point maybe at this and that additional article. So in our work, we found the most three fundamental content types that we're really dealing with are like a page, because a page never shows a creation date, an article, because it's driven by the publishing date, and if you list it, maybe it's ordered by the publishing date, and an event, if we talk about like at some point in time in the future, maybe something is happening, and we're using that specific date to order it. For the content work, these three things are the most important differentiation when we're dealing with lists and when we are supporting content creators for choosing content pieces. And sure, there are other things, like if you do projects, want to showcase projects or people, it makes sense to use different content types. I wouldn't use a page and just put paragraphs on it. But we don't use too many content types more. And here again, what we've seen before, like we have seen these more classic components with media, but also below, I said, teasers, as in a reference, which is more a back-end decision, like I want to point to this reference. are an important element that are rendered from the target. And for instance, that we are also placing lists in the content, like the editor can place lists. And hopefully, and that's why I love to work with these things, and why I'm so much invested in it. I want to figure out how to develop more interactive types of content, and I think it's where we need to innovate and figure out how can we create content that is creating a more interactive experience with the user. But you cannot do this with plain front-end editing. This is where you need to start thinking about structured content and figure out where it's really going to be hard. You only started with expansible or so elements start to be hard to manage them only in the front end. But also interactivity, what we've seen before, maybe sometimes content editors want to say, I wrote that story, I want to place a poll about this story, because these days it's important to engage the user, so it's the job of the content writer to figure out how they can get feedback or involve the users. So it's important that polls or these kind of things are, again, not something we need to involve developers or too like administration permissions to provide them these tools. It should be super simple. And for what we've seen before, like the donation widget, it's something that we adjust based on the call for action. We change not only buttons, but proposed amounts, and the story, like what will be the impact of when you do the donation, and lots of things there as well. The whole process that afterwards follows until the customer finally paid is highly varying based on the content context, and so how the content creator then decides that it wants to the path, like how the path should be. Yes. This what I show here quickly. It's basically our current status of our company internal distribution. Just want to show you a bit how we try to find solutions like within these iterations for ourselves. For instance, you have here a column that is called page type. So we're creating subtypes so we can work with the basic content type page, and we still have a subtype system so that we can group content. We still have freedom in the paragraphs internally. We have here enabled the moderation states as well, and we have, like above, you see these fundamental article, page and event types, and when we look at this page, how it is built, we see that. Yes, I forgot that. So basically, this is how we edit this page. So from this page here above, if we want to edit it, we click this button above, and as you see, we do not name it edit or something. We even have removed the contextual links and all this stuff. We have removed the tabs. This is actually a variation of content moderation sidebar. That's a config module, where you basically now see what are the available options. It's also nice, you could see the revisions here quickly in the sidebar. And then when you click edit here, so we have one single edit button. This is a more back-end perspective on this page that you've seen before. And for us it was important to develop icons for visual recognition of the types. It was important what you see there on the container. Yes, there. This is a container with, actually from the behavior, it has a layout that is 4 columns. So you see this here minimalistically summarized. So you know, okay, the children's are within 4 columns. So you understand in the backend perspective, very compact. You're gaining overview of the whole page. and you can now decide like iteratively whether you want to edit a specific thing. And again here you see these are content references. It means that actually the target of it defines how the appearance of this element is. And what we also did, but that's paragraph standard thing, you can enable the published flag here, and then you can, like, you do not need to delete something if you want to temporarily disable it. And this is now the second tab. We have here a content summary, so from the fields of the content, and we have here the layouts or style settings that we support. Yes, and this here is something that, like, how we improved the add dialog for us. We grouped it, and we added icons, and suddenly you work completely different with the types because the actual name is not that important anymore. So those are improvements. Some of these improvements are actually in paragraphs, in paragraph collections, so you get them immediately. But like Primer as our product, we have decided we really wanted to have it content only. Like most of the work after we instantiate it should be content, and we want to use paragraphs as heavily as possible to basically create the whole site structure and everything. Like everything you see in navigation, everything for us is content. And by iterating, we started to create default roles, do more permission separation, created these not only standard paragraph types, we created, besides the content types, more like these subtypes, and promoted them in the UI. We started to figure out that cloning is an important operation. Instead of expressing new tools for templating, the best practice is build a good high quality content and just start for a new story by cloning that piece of content. And then within, as I said before, we have a convert operation, so every single paragraph you can kind of transform it into a different paragraph to avoid like removing it or adding a new one and doing copy paste work within the structured domain. We are using menus to, like invisible menus, to express the parent trail, like how pages are structured, so that you see that you have a nice active menu path as well. We start to visualize the layout, not only as in what we've seen before, like layout 111, because we need to also tell the user how this layout behaves responsive, in responsive cases. And sometimes maybe a layout strategy can be you're hiding an element on mobile. It can be it's vertically stacking up, or it's maybe creating a horizontal slider or something, and then suddenly elements are no more visible. So when you're in the backend perspective, you should start to understand the layout without the need to switch to a mobile device and switch into to previewing it or so. And this level of standardization helped us also to work on documentation, and we have more and more better documentation that works for all our customers, and that's a completely different situation. For sure also, because the standardization is that high for all these projects, we support accessibility as much as possible out of the box. It's not a certified solution yet, but it has great results when you then, like each of the projects based on this solution is pretty well accessible. And it's really hard for me to like identify the relevant elements here, because it was like more than 50 of these items that I just told you. And every time we were working on one of these, we figured out that our mindset changed. And every time when we started and continued to work with content, we learned something new. And we started, like, in our priorities, what was the next important feature, or maybe what was an important thing last, like a few weeks before, changed, and we started to drop improvements that we previously thought were a good idea, and that we actually even liked for a certain time when working with content. Yes, as I core needs to pick up these problems, these ideas. Definitely I want to improve paragraphs as well. Some things that you have seen before, I want to bring them to paragraphs as well. So, but it's really hard. It's much more simple for us to build these solutions in our custom project, in our internal distribution, than building it for Contrib. But we're working heavily on that. And for instance, for our product as well, the expectation of users is to support autosaves, maybe improve the template workflow, and definitely one of the next steps that we want to do is looking into how can we use these tools for personalization. And there it's very important in the backend that you understand like what segment maybe will see what variation of content, and for this this approach, the structured approach, is a great starting point. Yes, and personally I'm also very interested in figuring out how we can pull data and figure out how we can support storytellers, people who are creating content with data sources, and providing them tools to actually then create more interactive elements. Or, you know, that's a big barrier for people. These days you need super experts with like statistical tools, and actually most of them are developers that are then doing data-driven storytelling. Yes, I do think that all these things should be there out of the box. And it's really important that what we're shipping is basically right after the installation. For me, it's much more important that the first use case is immediate content creation. And I want to see site building and development only as an option. So maybe you need to switch somehow the user interface to see all this extra functionality. And I think once we have that level of content centricity, and once all these tools are ready out of the box, we are at the point where we have like where productization of Drupal is possible, where we can even do what all these other content management systems, for instance, WordPress or so, where you can buy themes or so, where you allow content creators to quickly do a decision and say like, oh, I like this theme, and everything is supported. We cannot do it these days because themes only support a very specific case, and once people are starting to do site building, everything falls apart, and these paid themes usually break. So that's it. Any questions? Yes, please.
I like several parts of it. I'm not so fond about some other parts of your presentation, but I see where you want to go. Regarding the last part, productizing Drupal, providing ready themes and that such issues, we mostly know, at least all of us that work with Drupal for 5 or 10 years, that Drupal is targeted mostly, and most usually, to huge projects, to corporate projects. Providing a ready theme there is not even an option. I mean, the client would not like his website to look like another website where the theme has been bought. So why even go there?
Because this approach, first of all, we thought that this approach would help us to improve the economic situation for, say, customers with low budget. And we thought like, okay, we can bring Drupal to markets where customers basically, due to budget decisions, go for WordPress and later see maybe that was a bad decision, because they figure out over time they're creating a monster. And at some point they're doing a complete relaunch and drop all the whole investment. So we want to basically lower the barrier to basically see, don't start to write requirements, just do a workshop, start to think in content and start to structure these things. We want to provide this so as a no-brainer. And then afterwards you can figure out what is missing, and it's more an iterative process to figure out how to establish an agile project. And on the other hand as well, for the enterprises, unexpectedly we're pitching this approach now for big projects, and we're very successful with it, because we can prove that through writing less requirements, as in for them sitting down for months and writing 100 or even more pages of requirement by shipping default functionality out of the box, we can reduce a significant amount of potential cost. And it's for us, it's super easy to basically say, based on this product, first of all, you have 3 months of development time less, and due to the standardization afterwards, the maintenance cost is significantly lower. And we can even provide better support because projects have less variation, and our support team does not need to be part of the original project. They're really, it's really easy for them to provide the support. Did this answer your question?
Yes, I would still be hesitant about the theme part, but everything else makes sense. So standardizing components of the site absolutely makes sense. Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I want to do a follow-up on that question. I think the project sizes Drupal is suited for changed a lot over time. And Drupal switched focus a lot on really, really large projects. And me, myself, I use it for small projects a lot. And I embrace the initiative to make it suitable for small projects again. Because I think this is also a very fair use case.
We all embrace that, but with Drupal 8 it became something more difficult.
Yes.
How do you handle the taxonomy term rules? For example, if you take the content and at the starting point you say that the taxonomy terms are not revisional, but for personalization, tags or sequence are really important. For example, how do you display the turn page in your grammar distribution?
Yes, taxonomies have a field where they point to a content page that represents them. And it's, in different contexts we are resolving this reference.
Okay, and then you display the reference page in the full view, for example, for the taxonomy term,
Yes.
like a landing page or something.
Okay. 10 minutes to go and then the next session. So I'm available to discuss. Thanks.